right. Hi, everybody. David Fogel, CEO of the Symphonina Foundation, back with you for another Symphonina Foundation podcast. I'm joined today by conductor Geoffrey Pope. Geoffrey, how you doing today?
I'm doing wonderfully, David. How are you?
Well, doing great. It's a little bit rainy here in Southern California today. We could use the rain. It's all right, you know. And
Absolutely.
yeah, and I guess you're in Southern California getting rained on too.
I am. I'm normally in Los Angeles. Today is one of my days in Irvine. I teach, run the orchestra program at UC Irvine, so I'm down there today.
And you're also the music director and conductor for the Beach City Symphony, which is kind of in the same area.
That's correct. Yeah, a little sort of halfway between West LA and Irvine. Yeah, absolutely. I sort of live on the 405 right now.
Well, you can be a parking lot or you can be traveling expeditiously. It just depends on what time of morning or day, whatever it is that you're making your rounds.
That's right. A sense of purpose, I guess, for those mean streets.
Exactly. But you've also conducted and continue to conduct across the United States and Europe, I guess, probably for the last decade. Am I right with that?
Yes, I think my first time in Europe was actually it was in a workshop situation in 2015, and that was in Bulgaria. Since then, I've done actually quite a bit of work in Hungary and in Austria in different capacities. My work in Hungary has been a lot of that has been recording for film and television and video games. In Vienna, it's been more on the concert music and research side.
Now in Hungary, I'm guessing probably that's with the Budapest Scoring Orchestra then.
That's correct. That's correct. Yeah, it's a wonderful group. I love working with them. Of course, I love it when I'm recording in Los Angeles. But as far as going overseas, they're just fantastic players. We get some people there from the Vienna Philharmonic. Even it's quite a group.
We've had a tremendous success working with them over the past 3 years now from the Symphonina Foundation. Both of our previous two albums, we used them on various recordings, and also we have them on three symphoninas coming up for this year, with Peter Ilenyi being the conductor. And
Yes,
we've
yeah.
had a wonderful experience with them. Maybe we'll have an opportunity to have you conduct with them too in the future. We'll have to see how things go with that. But I can't say enough good things about working with them.
Fantastic. Well, I'm usually out there when Peter's on his break. We try to time it out so that I'm there in late July and early August, and he's often out of town at that point. So it works out very well, and it works out with my summer season break and everything like that. So I love being out there.
Well, we'll keep that in mind. Peter deserves a break too, though. So he seems like a very busy. I have to get him on the podcast sometime too, and we're working on finding the right time for that. But that's all great. I did want to ask you, like everybody has a story of how they got started and things, but I did note that you did an undergraduate degree in composition at USC and then went on for graduate work in composition, but also conducting. So how did you get the impulse to say, I want to be a conductor and not just a composer?
Right, right. Well, that's a good question. And they started coincidentally, I think, really in high school. I had been a piano student when I was very young and was lazy with practicing and interested in composition and so forth. And that's kind of a familiar trope, I guess, with people who get into composing. But when I was about 14 or so, I became interested in conducting. I'm not exactly sure why, what started it, but I started taking lessons with my high school orchestra conductor. And she had trained as a violinist. This is her name's Vicky Greenbaum. She trained as a violinist and began conducting local groups and so forth. And she ran the orchestra at my high school. Very, very compelling, very, very energetic, taught me everything I needed to know to get started. And so I was this 14-year-old kid having a lot of time actually with my high school orchestra, and that was formative for me. But being a composer at the same time was also wonderful, and they're very different sorts of disciplines, as you know. And being a composer allowed me to think about being a conductor from inside the score out, and then vice versa as a conductor thinking about composition. So I found they really informed each other very well. And during my undergrad as a composer, I should say there are not many undergraduate conducting programs in the US. That's much more of a Northern European thing. As a composer during my undergrad, I conducted a lot of new music, a lot of my friends' music, a lot of my own music. And so it was natural keeping that up that my interests would move more actually towards 20th century rep, some standard rep as a conductor. And as time progressed, then it began to include opera and earlier repertoire as well. But for me, it was very much conjoined with being a composer at first. When I went to Eastman, I did a master's in composition, and then I went to the dark side and did a master's in conducting, and my doctorate is also in conducting. And it more or less decided that that was the pursuit of the two that would, I'd spend the most energy on.
When you finish your master's in conducting, what is there in the doctorate program? I think you went to UCLA, if I saw
I
your
did,
notes. Yeah.
yes.
So what is there that's you're either trying to learn or demonstrate, or maybe something else that says I want to get the doctorate degree, or is it more of a teaching thing later? You want to be a professor, and it sets up other opportunities.
That's a very good question. Well, I think people talk about the doctorate as the death knell of a conducting career on the circuit, on a so-called professional conducting career, and that's often been the case. It's easy to be viewed just as an academic when you get that degree. I did want to get that degree because I wanted to learn more and I wanted to be able to teach at a university setting because I feel like a university is the best place to integrate various musical disciplines such as composition and conducting. And that's worked out very well for me actually because UCI, I get to, in addition to conducting the orchestra and the opera, I teach conducting, I teach orchestration. And I do it through a very much notation-based approach to viewing how these disciplines connect. I feel very lucky, actually, with that degree that I'm well suited to work with students in the classroom and in the rehearsal and concert space. And I think I'm probably the only teacher, only professor at UC Irvine who gets to do that to such an extent. So I feel very privileged to still have those two working together. I think the DMA allowed that. I also did the DMA and I studied with Neil Stolberg at UCLA. I was immediately drawn to his approach to performance practice. Neil's a very, very deep musician, and I found his approach very different from what I had at Eastman, which was equally valuable, certainly. But I was drawn to that, and perhaps it was a little more academic. But for me, that's what I felt like I needed. I'd never taken any formal performance practice classes. I'm not a Baroque specialist. I wanted to be able to feel good about conducting music in that world. I'd done a little bit of that, but not a whole lot until then. UCLA was great too because it allowed me to continue conducting contemporary music, and LA is just such a wonderful place to be.
You remind me of something, and I guess it happens whenever we're listening to someone else's story. We relate it to things in our own life, and for me, there are a few things I can relate what you're saying to in terms of when you're doing the doctor work and you're saying you want to learn how to conduct different types of things in performance and all sorts. It's easy, I think, to just think, if you don't know, that the conductor, once they're a conductor, they can conduct anything and do it equally well, regardless of what. But your comment brings up the point. Like when I was doing flying, I flew single engine planes for a hobby for a few years. When I was younger, I got commercial license and flew for over 500 hours. But when I got the instrument rating, I remember my instructor telling me, like, when I sign you off on this, it means you can do any approach that's legal anywhere in the United States, and I have to be confident that you're going to survive and your passengers are going to survive no matter what you're doing.
Sure,
It's not
sure.
just like, you learn the approach for your local field or whatever. You have to be able to go into some new situation and be able to handle it. And as you say that, I have a total appreciation for what you're saying. I mean, it's not doing each of these different things in conducting or composing or performing. They're all not the same. They're all not the same.
No, that's true, but there is a foundation. So, for example, if I felt really good about flying in the LA Bravo, I those skills could transfer to Class C airport pretty readily. Is
Nicely
my
done.
sense. So,
Yeah.
thank you. Well,
Yeah.
no, I used to
Yeah.
have I used to
Yeah.
have ambitions actually as a
Yeah.
pilot. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, so no, I think I know exactly what you mean. Actually, the airplane metaphor is a really good thing, a really good way to describe conducting, and we can talk about that later if it comes up too.
Yeah.
So it's
Well, it's
very, very
yeah,
cool. Yeah.
let's segue with what you were just talking about there, though, in the different types of things in conducting and how you approach conducting. I know you do, as you mentioned, work for commercial industry, whether that's film or advertisements, commercials, things like that, versus maybe what you would do preparing an orchestra for a performance, for a sit-down performance. What are the kind of the issues that you have to address in both of those settings?
Absolutely. Well, that's a really important question. I think you, regardless of the setting, want something that's musically compelling, regardless of the genre. And you also want a process that's good for the players and good for everybody involved, whether that's a client or whether that's your orchestra board or your audience or whatnot. So there's a process that's important in addition to the product, let's say. And for me, the commonalities, you have to have a really good ear. You have to think on your feet. You have to be very efficient. And in general, it's helpful to be likable. And beyond those areas, I can't speak for myself, but I strive in those three or four areas, and I think I've had success in there. So I do find commonalities between concert conducting and session conducting. In terms of the player responsiveness and so forth, there's a sense in a lot of session work that you have a click track and the conductor can only make things worse in a sense, and maybe that transfers to concert music too, that you have really good internal rhythm and so forth, and you listen to each other, and the conductor can only harm. But as far as a do no harm approach, my sense in the studio is a good conductor can also make things a lot more lively for the musicians in the performance. And so for me, that's one of the things I've brought to the studio work, and I think been recognized for. Efficiency is key, and also honestly knowing who the boss in the room is, knowing the backstory to a particular project. That sort of thing. Often it's the composer. It's very rarely the conductor in studio, almost never the conductor. Often it's the composer or the producer, or it's even an orchestrator running things from the booth. It could be any one of those people. So there's a different hierarchy too. I think a commonality between that is you're there to serve the music, as much of a cliche as that sounds, but I do think people respond to that the best overall. So there are plenty of commonalities, there should be, but in terms of the workflow, you're answering to someone else. If I feel like there's something that should be finessed in the studio and the producer is fine with how it went, if we have extra time, I will be a stickler about that and go back and think, okay, we can do better with this. But that's a matter of efficiency and a matter of time. And when you're in a situation that the clock goes over that 9:50 a.m. mark or whatnot, into 1 second into overtime or something, that's not something the client likes. So
Yeah. I think
yeah.
too, my understanding, and I'm pretty sure I have this part right, is certainly when you're doing a performance for a sit down audience, you have one shot. You're going to do it. It's what hopefully you practiced it if you have the opportunity, and it's going to be whatever it's going to be at that point. But the difference between whatever it's going to be is in commercial work, oftentimes it might be that you have a score, but the score gets changed as you're doing it. Maybe the orchestrator's there or a producer's there and says, actually, we're going to do one less trombone on that part or one more, or we're going to just record the string section only now and then use that for striping in for audio engineering later, or maybe they're going to, change a part, write a part, any of those things. So everybody has to be flexible at your leadership, right?
Absolutely. And so for me, coming from the composer background, one of the things I do in the industry, in addition to conducting, is I orchestrate. And there's a kind of, actually, speaking of performance practice, there's a studio performance practice too. We don't really think of it in those academic terms, I guess. But there are certain conventions in the studio. There are conventions in notation, in the recording process, and so forth. That for me, as an orchestrator, I've been lucky to have to deal with and jump in with. So it's a fluid process, certainly. The goal is that you don't do a lot of changing of notation and content, so to speak, on the stand. The great Conrad Pope, orchestrator and composer, he has a saying that the most expensive copyist in Hollywood is a violinist during a session with a pencil. And that's true in
Yeah.
terms of
Yeah.
the kind of time that's spent. You don't want questions. You want everything to read down really easily. But yes, you do have to be fluid. One of the techniques in orchestration that we use a lot is cueing, and it's different than, say, a conductor cueing, somebody to come in, or in parts writing a cue so players know where they are. Cueing in an orchestration sense is writing an extra part that can be easily tacited. So you can ask the players on one take or one pass, play your cues. And so they'll play this extra information the orchestrator's added. The composer doesn't like it. You can say, don't play your cues. And then you get what the orchestrator has, or what the composer has approved. So that's one way that you're already expecting some built-in, there are contingencies. For me, as another commonality as a conductor, I view that very much as problem solving. Actually, my business is called Musical Problem Solver. And one of the responsibilities of a conductor, no matter the setting, is predicting where things are going to fall apart, where things are going to be ragged, and working preemptively against that. So whether that means deciding that you're going to do an extra punch point or something in the studio, or if you're going to change your technique in a certain way in a concert music setting, that's all part of the conductor's job, is to anticipate those issues that will take time and sap the energy from the group.
And how do you communicate that with the orchestra?
So for an orchestra, for example, let's take the opening movement of Beethoven 2. We go from a slow section into an allegro there. There's a place where conductors either speed up into it or just drop into it as a straight sort of metric modulation, I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to speed up into it, you have to take into mind that the violins are playing these repeated notes, and they're playing them off the string. It's very hard to mobilize players together when they're playing something off the string, meaning spiccato. It can be difficult, especially in certain tempo realms. And so that's something that might need to be rehearsed a couple times. That's something that doesn't usually go perfectly the first time, and that's why that piece is often on audition repertoires. How the conductor, ideally, they communicate that with their hands well, and their receptivity to what the orchestra is doing, and their force of will behind it. But often there are things that just need a couple times to get through.
Yeah. Are there other cases where it would be good in a situation, maybe not that exact one, but you could envision something maybe where you might have a few violinists hold back performing whatever they're performing to be ready to perform the next thing, and then have the others catch up with them? Or how would that work?
Well, that's interesting. That's very interesting. I've only really seen that on page turns, actually, or sometimes if there's a rapid transition between playing arco with the bow and playing pizzicato, plucking it.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes those are hard to grab on time. So that's where I would see that. If you, for artistic rather than pragmatic reasons, if you want to thin out a section, of course you can have some players tacit. Recently, one of the recent pieces I've conducted a couple places, the Debussy Nocturnes. There's this beautiful divisi in the first movement. It's dividing. I think it divides he divides the violins into groups of six parts, into three parts, into four parts, into two parts. And this is just, I think, within the first violins, if I recall correctly.
Hmm.
So you have different configurations of players playing different lines, and that all, of course, depends on your section size and so forth. And if you have a 12-person section and just two people on a particular line, you're going to run into phasing difficulties. And so there are times where you have people play something else, but they're mostly pragmatic.
Got it. I wanted to mention before we get to what you're doing this year that you're also involved in something called forensic musicology. What is forensic
That's
musicology?
Yeah, forensic musicology essentially is the study of music in very granular pieces that can be applied to issues of musical copyright or musical research. It's looking into music in a slightly different way than an academic musicologist might. And so most often it does translate into analyzing music in terms of copyright issues.
So have you had the opportunity then to be involved in legal cases where you've offered opinions, or how does that work for you?
I've been involved in hundreds of matters actually, and often this has been most of the time this is actually through a company, and I've been working in a supportive role, doing the analysis, helping prepare the expert witness, and so forth. I do some of this on my own, but with my conducting and orchestrating and all of those schedules, is not something that I seek out as much these days. But yes, it's exciting. It's exciting to follow the court precedents in the Ninth Circuit, the Second Circuit, what is considered protectable music expression, what processes there are for, let's say, filtering out non-original elements. I love searches for prior art. And then on my own business side of it, what I specialize in is helping composers and studios navigate infringement risks of their own when, say, there's a temp track that's put in as a placeholder for an original score, and the composer is asked by the director or the producer, can you get close to this? We like the way this sounds.
Tricky stuff, especially for the sync licensing world, which I'm only tangentially been involved in so far. But we get briefs all the time that say, we want something that sounds like "Welcome to the Jungle," whatever, and then it's
Sure.
and then it's,
Well,
it's
and there have
tricky.
been
How close can you get?
dangerous, yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's leave that. We'll leave that for you and
Yes.
and the attorneys, and let's go. What are you working on this year?
Oh, wow. Well, that's a very interesting question. I have some orchestration projects coming up. I have next season coming up with some orchestras and some possible developments there, some of which I can't really discuss yet,
Okay, we'll
unfortunately.
keep them secret
Uh,
here.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And hopefully some wonderful educational experiences for my students at UC Irvine. So a whole cluster of things. It's often hard to predict because I'm not a circuit conductor. I don't have seasons planned out 2 years in advance or something like that. I don't have all my travel mapped out and so forth. Oftentimes I'll get asked to do things very much last minute, and that is exciting for me. I think being in LA, you get a lot of opportunities like that. I was asked recently to cover at Chapman University and also briefly at Cal State Long Beach for their conducting and orchestra professor, and that's been wonderful and allowed me to work with a whole range of different students and different student abilities and focuses. So I'm anticipating some more of that next year, and I'm looking forward to that as well as the commercial things, and probably some more time out in Budapest. As I mentioned to you, I'm a staff conductor with Budapest Scoring. I'm usually out there for part of the summer, and I really enjoy the players there. It's fantastic. Of course, I really do also wish more work were happening in Los Angeles. and my colleagues here were more occupied in the studios. We would love some of that work to come back, but a lot of it's out of our hands and is really in the production budget hands.
Well, maybe we can have you back sometime before you head out to Budapest this summer or whenever it's appropriate to catch up on the secret things when they're not so secret. We can
Yes,
make sure
indeed.
everybody knows what you're doing and help promote that. And also maybe we can think about ways to bring back some of that production budget to the LA area or other places in the United States.
I think that would be wonderful. And I think, it's really something that's been evolving with the streaming shows and those studios and so forth. It's just so much less expensive to have production elsewhere. And I think we need to incentivize a return to LA because LA is the area that has the richest film production history in the world. There's no question of that. And a lot of the composers I love the most actually came over to LA, escaping the Nazis and so forth, in the 30s and 40s. And there's just such a wealth of musical and artistic history here that it would be wonderful to have some of that back here. But of course, it's also wonderful for these musicians across the world to be participating in that industry, and they're fantastic as well. So
Yep.
if there can be more back here, that would be fantastic.
I think, as you know, with our international Symphonina orchestra that I put together, we have players from all over the world recording separately. We're definitely on the same page there, and I bet we would probably agree also that in the spirit of the metaphor of a rising tide lifting all ships, it would be great if we could just get more orchestra around the world, here and there.
Absolutely. My mantra for concert programming as well as more music by more people more often.
I like that.
And
I can't
and
steal it
so
now,
I,
though. But
now you can't
I
steal.
can't
It's
steal
on.
it. It's good though. I like that. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
That's wonderful.
Well, thank you. Thank you so
Yeah.
much,
No, Jeffrey,
David.
it's
This has
great. We're
been
going to
great.
listen to some more of your music that you've conducted on the way out, and like I said, we'll stay in touch. And you just let us know when you have something else that we can let everybody know about. We'll do it.
Absolutely. I'm sitting on some things, so I'm very excited.
All right. Take care.
All right. Take care. Bye bye.